I get asked a lot of questions about MOOCs by viewers and by people I run into at conferences or talks. Sometimes people are asking me, Dr. Sadler, why don't you produce your own MOOC? And I'll talk about that in a few moments, some of the inherent difficulties involved with that. But a lot of people are asking, so, how should I view MOOCs? How should I regard this? Because there's a lot of hype back and forth. A lot of it's negative, a lot of it's overly positive. And with any sort of new reorganization of educational practices involving technology, we don't actually know how some of this stuff is going to pan out. But I think that at this point in time we can give verdicts about some of it, and I think now is the time to actually do so. So that's what I want to do in this video. This is not going to talk about all the ins and outs of MOOCs. What I'm going to be doing here is running through a few different basic points about the format, the structure, the general idea, and the structure, the sociological effects that MOOCs have within the education sphere and also within the broader sphere of culture as mediated through the internet, the technosphere that I'm involved in, like it or not. I'm going to give you my views, and my views are pretty guardedly negative. I'm not a big MOOC supporter. I see some legitimate roles for them in some areas, but I think that in large part they pose a lot of problems, a lot of dangers, many of them stemming from people who are overly optimistic or are just plain gullible when it comes to them. So I'll get to that in a few moments. Let's talk first, what is a MOOC? Just basic knowledge. It's massive, it's an acronym, massive open online classes or courses. And like some commentators have pointed out, these are kind of slippery terms. How massive is massive? Does that mean having 100 people in the class or 10,000? What does open mean? Does it mean that they're free? Because now some of the MOOCs are actually talking about, pricing options. Does it mean that anybody can get in without any prereqs? Online, of course, what exactly counts as online and what components are going to be delivered online and how is that going to work? And then courses. Are these really courses? Do they have all of the not just bells and whistles, but the necessary integral components of an educational course? We're getting to the point now where people are actually talking about putting entire curricula into a MOOC format, which is kind of a dizzying thought. And there'd be even a greater need for figuring out just what exactly these terms mean. And I see people kind of all over the map with this. Now, some of the MOOCs are in the process or in the business of eventually offering credit. A lot of them give you certificates of completion. They're always web-based. That's an integral part of being online, but they use a variety of different platforms. Some of them are being developed by institutions that are already in the education business. Some of them are like new startups. They're not just partnerships like edX. They're actually new businesses like Udemy or Coursera, which are functioning like corporations, but originally intended to transform the educational landscape. And what we got to ask ourselves is, how are these things structured? What are the ideas behind the way that they're supposed to work? How do they actually work in practice? And what sort of mission creep has started to go on with them as well? Now, one other thing that I do need to say is I mentioned a few companies already, like Udemy and Coursera. iTunes U is also involved in this sort of thing in a slightly more tangential way. There's other companies sort of champing at the bit to get into this. Google is got its own things in the background going on. There's a MOOC.org initiative going on, and nobody's quite sure how all these are going to pan out. But one of the things that you see all of them saying, along with a lot of other new players in the educational marketplace, you might say, are that they are there to transform education in positive ways. And why would that be necessary? Well, it's felt that there is a real crisis, and I would actually say that there's a number of different crises all kind of intersecting with each other and causing a kind of feedback phenomenon with each other in education, particularly in post-secondary education. This is a much larger topic. I can't do more than just skim the surface, but there are real problems out there for what we'd call stakeholders, the people who want to know that education is actually taking place, like parents, government agencies that are putting up money, the institutions themselves, the donors. The students themselves should be very concerned about whether they're actually learning anything that's genuinely sticking. So there's a problem of assessment of student learning, and holding teachers to some sort of standards and holding administrators to some sort of standards and institutions as wholes. There are a lot of other problems as well. Technology by its very nature is something that we use, we come to rely upon, and yet it's also disruptive. It offers new possibilities. We're encountering students who have been much more informed by technology than those of previous generations, although you'd have to go way, way back to find generations that weren't already greatly influenced by television, that haven't sort of learned some things from the internet revolution. And educational institutions also have this intrinsically altruistic bent to them of wanting to serve. There's this great feeling that many people are not getting the sort of access to education that they ought to be given, that perhaps they deserve as a human right. That's a debatable issue, but I just want to say that some people view it that way. There's the entire developing world. There's all these people who, because of rising college costs and the shrunken economy, can't afford to go to school, or are living in places. I encounter this through the videos that I produce. I get comments from people who are in foreign countries and they can't go through their state institution to learn philosophy, for example, because that's reserved for a certain elite, and they don't belong to that. They're in a more tech-based class, or what we call vocational trades. So there's a lot of different things coming together, and I think a lot of people think that MOOCs are the solution, and that's where a lot of the initial hype came from, and that's where the backlash against that is coming from. What we want to do is look at this very carefully, because really, when it comes down to it, so much has been invested in MOOCs. They're here to stay. They're not going to go away. And they are transforming the educational landscape to some degree. And they're going to continue doing so. So we don't want to just be, Luddites and say, away with the MOOCs, At the same time, we need to be very careful about how we endorse them and which ones we endorse, because we shouldn't forget that these are associated with particular institutions, with particular companies, agents who we don't actually have control over, who may have their own agendas, and I'll talk about that in a few moments, and who may in fact be doing things without even realizing it that are reinforcing some of the already existing problems in academia and in the larger marketplace of ideas that academia is supposed to be serving. So what I really want to focus on is this notion that MOOCs are democratizing education. I want to say that's false. Why do I want to say that's false? If we take it in any really substantive sense of democratizing, as in, widening the capacity for people to actually be involved, to be engaged, to be think about what democracy involves. Democracy is not just everybody gets a vote. Aristotle had this right when he said, democracy not only means that everybody who's in the voting class gets to vote, they also have the chance to hold offices. They have the chance not only to be ruled, but to rule. I don't think that that is actually present in the way that MOOCs are being done, and I think that MOOCs are contributing to forces that are actually hindering that or eroding that. And I'll get to that in a few moments. There is a sort of opening of access to people, but we have to talk about who's actually taking advantage of that and who's able to take advantage of that. They certainly are disrupting education. They're shaking things up. I don't know that they're disrupting education in very substantive, go down to the bedrock kind of ways where colleges and universities are now like reshaping their entire curricula. That's though what's being proposed. That's right now more or less in the realm of the imagination and in the realm of discourse, not in the realm of actual structural change that is being implemented. But that's a very important thing to keep an eye on. Democratizing education would mean opening up education content-wise to a greater number of agents, voices, perspectives. MOOCs are doing that in some ways, and they're also hindering that in other ways, in my view. And a lot of this discourse about MOOCs really depends on making a very strong distinction between MOOCs that are involved with what we might call convergent fields, say computer programming, or microeconomics, or things like that. And then what they often call divergent fields, which include many of the social sciences, definitely the humanities, where there's a lot of different particular perspectives. And it's not expected that we all have to get on the same page, because what we're aiming at is less providing the ability to regurgitate knowledge back or to do a certain task, and more the ability to think about what we're doing, to give reasons to another person that person, if they're reasonable, might in turn find reasonable to examine and to entertain. And I don't think MOOCs are that good at that yet. In part because I don't think the institutions that are deeply involved with that are very good at that. So, there's a number of different things I want to talk about with respect to the criticisms that can be made of MOOCs. And I think that there's really 5 main ones that I think myself are compelling. There's a lot of other criticisms you can make too, like you can't possibly teach, Intro to Philosophy in a meaningful way to 2,000 people all at the same time. And there's ways to sort of get around that the MOOCs are experimenting with. And I have to admit, some of those ways actually make quite a bit of good sense. But here's the things that I think are happening. One is a very practical point that I want to make. There are only so many hours in any given day. So if we are expanding the range of educational options, we're actually contributing to, what's called the paradox of choice, where it becomes harder to choose what we're going to do. And the options that we have often paralyze us and become meaningless in the process. We're also generating, if MOOCs really catch on, a society of educational consumers who then have to choose between these different things. And all the time that's spent consuming, most of the time, is also time that can't be spent actively producing. Now there are some ways around that. You can design assignments, for example, so they require somebody to do some research, which in a way is consuming although actual research is much more active. And I'm not sure about MOOCs being able to teach that sort of thing very, very well. There's a hands-on component that's needed with that. In any case, there's only so many hours in the day, and if we're going to expand our involvement in being students, which I'm not against, I think that's a great thing, we have less time to be content producers, to be knowledge communicators, to be engaged. So there's a real danger there. And I'm not saying that MOOCs can't address this, but it is a real danger. The second thing is, I think that MOOCs are likely to lead to a kind of homogenization, not only of education, but of the experience of education. One of the things that I think is a great strength of the American educational system is the fact that it's not a system. As opposed to some of the other state systems supplemented by a few private schools that are prevalent in other countries, we have a plethora of different models, different schools that are known for different strengths. It's really, if you had enough knowledge, and it's very difficult to get the kind of knowledge that's required in this respect, but if you had the right knowledge about what educational institutions are like, you could actually find a place for every single kind of student where they would flourish if they were willing to put in the time. You could even take the ones who are kind of iffy about flourishing and putting in the time, and have schools that are well suited to them, where they kind of specialize in that sort of thing. We deliver education online. We deliver education in massive classes, in small online classes. I teach some of those myself. I know what that's like. We have not just one single platform for that. There's Blackboard and Canvas and Sakai and Moodle. There are so many different options. I think that MOOCs, in some respects, present a danger of flattening that out and saying, here is the standard now. This is what we need to conform to. So I see that as a real problem. Another big problem with MOOCs at this point in time is that it's pretty difficult to assess their effectiveness in generating student learning, lasting learning. And exactly the same problem that was noted in Academically Adrift, the famous wake-up call from about 5 years ago that hit the academic establishment like a load of bricks. The problem that they noted in that study was that the better institutions are turning out students who know quite a bit, because they took in students who knew quite a bit and already had the skills that were needed to get by in college, and they didn't improve an awful lot in that 4-year time of education, 4 to 6 year actually. The same thing is happening with MOOCs. They're taking in the highly educated, for the most part, not just in America, but worldwide. People started actually studying this. Most of the people who are doing MOOCs are people who already have college degrees. So it's kind of like cherry picking the experimental batch that you're going to work on. It's a hell of a lot easier to teach people who already know how the system works and how to proceed through it, and who already have the experience of having made it through. And you probably don't even have to have them write papers, because they're already thinking along those lines. Taking the general population is an entirely different matter. And if we want to say that MOOCs are really the way to go, we need to have genuine assessment of them. I don't see that being done. I don't see genuine assessment of student learning being done in a lot of places, even in traditional education. It's very hit and miss. If you're under SACS, the accreditation body for the southern schools, it's a lot more rigorous than, say, under some of the other regional bodies. And even those are kind of hit and miss. Some institutions get censured, other institutions that probably should get censured don't, because the investigators don't look into it, the interviewers don't ask the right questions, and schools write up self-reports and people believe them. So there's a real issue here with assessment, and assessment's important because if you want to make policy decisions about where resources ought to be going or where students ought to be directed, you need to have some evidence to base those on. And it's got to be real assessment, not just proxy assessment, not just sort of make-work assessment. It's got to really be assessing, are the students improving in skills like written communication, critical thinking, these content areas that they're supposed to be studying. So that takes a lot of work, a lot of careful designing. The fourth thing I want to talk about, and as a caution when it comes to MOOCs, they're basically working in a new corporate environment. Particularly the ones like Coursera and Udemy. There's a great article that I'm going to link to in the description of this video talking about the pivot that Udemy has done. Udemy was talking all this great, lingo about transforming education, and they're going to be this disruptive force, and it's going to be for the best, and it's going to widen education for everybody, and everybody is going to have the chance to study with world-class instructors. All sounds pretty good, right? And now they're starting to sound an awful lot more like traditional corporations. They're more or less training people for corporate jobs, and they're interested in their bottom lines and whether they can be profitable. And this is where things are going to go. I mean, these companies, they may start out having this great vision of making education accessible for everybody. That's a tough thing to sustain over time. And, you can say, well, what about, people getting big grants, from, say, the Melissa and Bill Gates Foundation, or, Ford Foundation, or pick whoever you like. Those always come with strings. Those always come with some sort of agenda that's being pushed, and we should be, I think, wary of that. And I'm not, trying to say the sky is falling or anything like that, but just not having a direct corporate involvement doesn't mean that you don't think like a corporation, and it starts to lead to something that erodes the educational aspect of it. As soon as it becomes administrators and corporate types, and administrators basically are corporate types these days, and it's no longer educators who are running these things, you should be very, very wary about any claims that are being made about widening education, democratizing it, opening up for everybody. Now, I saved the best for last. And here is where the criticisms that I'm going to make are not being made by quite as many people. The criticisms that I've made so far are not particularly original. I think a lot of people are worried about these sorts of things. They're probably not as given to stressing the importance of assessment as I am, because I'm kind of an evangelist for authentic assessment. But a lot of people are saying those. What I think the real problem with MOOCs is they're not democratizing education. They're actually generating two different classes of people. And they're eliminating another class too, if they catch on. They're opening up opportunities for those who are in the elite, who are well connected, who went to the right schools, who teach at the right schools, who have the right contacts, who have the opportunities, who are a very, very small class of academics, to teach a massive swath of people who are going to be essentially just consumers, and are never going to have the chance, except, every once in a while there will be an aberration from this. There'll be the lucky one who gets in to make it up into that class. Academia is already quite a bit like that. But right now there's actually a lot of people in between too. There's all the adjuncts, and that's a topic that we need to talk about some other time. But there's all these other people teaching at institutions that are not involved with MOOCs, but are being encouraged to consume. I remember when I was at Fayetteville State University, they gave us iPads for this pilot program, and then they showed us iTunes University, and they started telling us, you guys could have your students watching these videos. You could have students watching world-class professors giving lectures on the topics that you're teaching. And a few of the teachers are like, so you want us to direct our students to not pay attention to us in class? We're not good enough to lecture for them. We should have these people lecture for them instead. And of course there was a lot of backpedaling. No, we're not saying that. This is just a resource. But there is a lot of pushing of this, And it's interesting. There have been a couple cases that have come up recently that I think are very relevant and say a lot about this kind of situation. So Michael Sandow, who's a brilliant philosopher, I like his work quite a bit. He has done a number of lectures that you can find on YouTube, and they're also incorporated into a MOOC about justice, the nature of justice. So it's in political theory, political philosophy. What made the headlines is a number of San Jose professors refused to teach. And teach? I mean, he's teaching the class, isn't he? If it's a MOOC. They refused to use the resources that the school wanted them to use from that course in their course, because they saw that what was happening is they were being squeezed out. It's very difficult to compete with a Sandow. It's difficult to compete with and he's not in this business, he just lets himself be videotaped all the time, a Zizek, or a Peter Singer, or any of these sort of people. As a matter of fact, you don't even have to have a really great name recognition. You just need to come from an elite university. You just need to be teaching at Harvard, and people will take you more seriously than if you're teaching at, say, even like Vassar. And if you're teaching at Vassar, you'll probably be taken a bit more seriously than teaching at Marist. And if you're teaching at Marist, a bit more seriously than, say, teaching at FSU, And there's the same thing goes with the state schools. There's the elite ones. There's they call them, public Ivies. And then there's everybody else. And if you're in the everybody else class, you're being sort of pushed out of that middle intermediate range into the consumers. And you're being treated as somebody who's basically just fit to start the videotape playing, start the projector running, start the slides. Remember those old film strips? Not really to teach, not really to design, not really to implement on your own, except with the guidance that's coming from on high. There's a real danger of that. Now, that may be okay in some fields. That is poison for philosophy, for history, for political theory, any of the humanities. Really, any of the social sciences that are even self-aware of them as being social sciences with a past, a history. It would be poison for the arts. It would be poison, I think, even for business. I think we want business professors who actually know their stuff, are practicing their craft in the classroom, and who are acknowledged as somebody to measure up to by the students, not just some schmuck to turn things on and to turn out the lights when everybody leaves. Now, you could say, well, Dr. Sadler, you're really overstating the case. MOOCs aren't trying to do anything like that. There are proposals to do that sort of thing. And it appeals to the elites of both the left and the right. And it also appeals to people who are saying, we need to look at the bottom line. There's this recent case with this Dunier professor, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, Mitchell Dunier, who was a sociology professor, taught a very, very popular course for Coursera, and Coursera decided that they wanted to license the course so that they could have colleges buy it, and then colleges could save money by not keeping all these professors to teach this course. He could teach the course instead for them. And he refused. What was really interesting is he said, I'm not going to do anything that would actually put other academics' jobs at risk. Now, what he left out of that explanation, and what nobody actually brought up at the time, well, why should we care? I mean, if it's more efficient to have one superstar professor with a MOOC who's got a great, reputation and has the leisure time to write books and give talks and, is got all the connections to get it, teach for Coursera, because Coursera doesn't just hire anybody. They like the elite institutions. If he really can provide a better product than these other professors, well, screw them. Reorganize the economy, right? It's just becoming more efficient. He didn't say, I can't provide you with something as good or better than what these other professors are providing. Instead, he just said, we got to keep them, in their positions. Why should we keep them in their positions if they're not actually contributing value? I don't have any problem with that conservative argument about teacher performance. But I do think teachers are performing. That's the issue. I don't think that one guy with a MOOC, however brilliant, armed with, computer grading of essays or a whole bunch of TAs who, labor behind the scenes to keep the discussions going, because one guy can't actually engage in conversation with 1,000 people, let alone 10,000. I don't think that the MOOC can actually deliver the kind of education that good college professors can do. And I think that we want to keep a sort of intermediary strata in place of good college professors who are much bigger than that small elite who gets the bulk of the money, the notoriety, the opportunities, and all that. That's a crappy system to begin with, but it's a hell of a lot better than just pushing all of them into the realm of education consumers. Now, you might respond by saying, well, Dr. Sadler, what if they, created a MOOC for you? That's not going to happen. Coursera deals with institutions. edX does the same thing. There may be a few organizations out there that are looking to do it for individuals. But I know I wouldn't have the time to grade 1,000 papers. And if you're not actually requiring people to do some writing, you can do peer grading and all that sort of stuff, but that requires an awful lot of training on your part. So you've got to put in that work somewhere, no matter what. And can one professor put that in with 1,000 students? I don't think so. My dean is actually concerned about having overloads with 35 students in an online class as opposed to 30 students in an online class, because he thinks the quality of education might be going down. And he's right. There's only so much time for an educator to actually devote to the one-on-one interactions and the group interactions that are required day in, day out throughout the semester for real education to take place. We want that middle strata there. We need people, we need a diversity of people teaching all of these subjects. And all MOOCs are really doing is putting something else up here at the apex. What it really reminds me of is a story that's told about Heidegger. Martin Heidegger, who was a philosopher, he thought that not that many people can actually do innovative work in philosophy. So the curricula should be reorganized in Germany, and everybody should more or less just teach what they're supposed to teach and just don't try to think it through too much. Don't try to do any original work. That'll be left to, like, you know, the very top philosophers, the ones who actually have a shot at doing anything innovative, interesting. The rest of them should shut up, stay in line, and just teach the content. I think there's a real danger of that happening with MOOCs. So I think that it leads to the reinforcement of an already existing and not very good class system within academia. I don't think that they're actually disruptive. I don't think that they're actually, in large part, democratic. I think there's potential for MOOCs to do a lot of good, but I don't think that they should supplant traditional or even smaller online education. I think that that's the way to go. I think that we should be offering education as widely as we can. You notice I'm all for putting videos for free on YouTube, shooting all sorts of content. I like sites like Learnist and smaller, you know, startups that are trying to provide educational content to other people. I'm all for that sort of thing. I'm even for the pay sites, because I think educators ought to get paid for creating content, particularly if it's good content. I think that that sort of entrepreneurial attitude is a good thing. But I think it should be happening at the lower levels. I don't think that it should be these massive dinosaurs ruling the land and pushing everybody else more or less out of the way. Unfortunately, those tend to get the most attention, and people tend to glom onto that. I think that what we really ought to be doing is looking at the smaller companies, the smaller classes, the people who are developing good content, and figuring out ways how to link these together, how to widen that so that we can reach this massive audience of people who do want to use the internet to enjoy some of the benefits of education that are available to them. So there's my take on MOOCs. I'm sure this is going to provoke a lot of comments. I'm willing to entertain any of those that are within the realm of reasonability.